Sup, freaks? It's your boy Marty here to introduce this episode of Tales from the Crypt. I had the immense pleasure of sitting down with Elisabeth Préfontaine, who's been putting out some incredible content pertaining to Bitcoin on her blog, Octonomics. We had a far-ranging conversation about her experience in the analog banking world before it went very digital. She started working, I believe, when she was 11, if I recall correctly, and has a lot of experience in the traditional finance world, particularly in Canada and Montreal, and has a lot of unique insights into the lack of transparency within the banking and financial industry, particularly in Canada, the analog nature of the traditional systems and how they compare to Bitcoin, and how Bitcoin is just a huge inflection point in terms of tech and philosophy of how these systems shall be run. We also talk about political correctness leaking into the boardroom and a bunch of other stuff, including how to define Bitcoin, or why you should not attempt to define Bitcoin as anything other than a scarce information space and messaging system. It is free speech at the end of the day. This episode of Tales from the Crypt is brought to you by the Cash App. You freaks know all about them. They're helping us do many things, and they're making sats the standard. All right, if you haven't seen this yet, Miles Suter teased it the other day. Matt Odell confirmed it last night. Android users are now able to make sats the standard within the Cash App. You can stack sats, receive sats, send sats, sell sats if you so please. And soon they're going to be adding an auto buy function as well. Miles confirmed it in the same thread that he dropped. The sats the standard is here for Android users. Still waiting for it as an iOS user. I can't wait till that comes. On top of the stack satsing, I always mix this up. On top of the sat stacking that you can do, you can also stack slivers of stonks now with Cash App investing. If your favorite stonk is a little too expensive, even after this huge market downturn, Cash App investing lets you buy as little as $1 of those stonks if you're buying on the way down. Because Cash App is directly connected to your bank account, there's no 4 to 5 day waiting periods. You can start investing today. Cash App investing is a subsidiary of Square and member SIPC. As always, when you download the app, make sure you use the code STACKINGSATS. That's one word, STACKINGSATS. You're going to get $10, and $10 is going to go to our good friends at Owls Lacrosse. Spread the word about this. All right? If you have friends that don't have the Cash App, they're not listening, tell them to use the code STACKINGSATS too, because $10 going to them and then to Owls Lacrosse is just great. It's a great cause. Owls Lacrosse. Download the Cash App from your local app store today, and please enjoy this episode with Elisabeth Préfontaine. I know I certainly did. Take care.
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
What is up, freaks? Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt. It's your boy Marty Bent here for another quarantine episode of Tales from the Crypt. Getting acclimated to the remote interviews. I prefer to do these in person. My guest today, we were scheduled to meet in person, but the virus got in the way, and we are both speaking from home now. I'd like to introduce you freaks to Elisabeth Préfontaine, founder of Octonomics, and just a Bitcoiner that's hopped on my radar recently. Has been putting out some incredible content on her blog by the name Octonomics. She's been syndicating that on the Knox blog as well. So Elisabeth, I think we should start basically just getting to know you a little bit more. What were you doing before Bitcoin, and how did you find Bitcoin?
Mm-hmm. Oh, hi. It's a pleasure to meet with you and to your audience. I In a nutshell, I started working at 11 years old. So I had my first steady job at 11 years old. So I got acquainted with financial independence quite early on. I kept it until I was 14, and then started working in the financial service industry at 17. So I was a cashier in a bank branch, where I'm therefore old enough to have cashed a physical coupon bond in a bank branch. Like it happened only once, but also I have seen like all the banking before internet was even a thing. And yet I'm young enough to have picked on Bitcoin. So there's a lot of financial technology innovation in between. And there were lots of parallels when I've discovered Bitcoin and the boiling ecosystem that made me go back in time into the thing of internet banking and online banking and virtual banking, when it was cool at the time. So there was parallels there. So the background is 25 years of financial service industry experience, including online banking, capital markets, swaps, derivatives, swaps, and bonds, and also investments such as hedge funds and ETFs.
Wow. Started working at 11. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can dive in here. Particularly, you recently spent 2 years, I believe, attempting to start a fintech startup, and really became acquainted with the rough world of regulations and trying to create new financial technologies within the incumbent financial system.
Uh-huh.
The name of the app was escaping me right now.
Rative. I didn't spend 2 years. In fintech startup, I understood something very quick is fail fast by testing the most difficult assumption first, and is what I did. But I wish Rative was a failed business, because at least I could have learned something. And the only takeaway from Rative I was able to get is how profoundly corrupt the financial system industry is. Like, that was really my last attempt at making things right for the end customer by increasing drastic transparency on the financial service industry. And then I got to realize very quickly that incumbents, regulators, nobody has interest in transparency, and they can cherry pick innovators. They can literally so that's why when you have permissioned innovation, it's a no-go. Like there's no innovation. And I grew very frustrated by them, because if you're not able to have transparency on the very job you're selling project, essentially what Rative was about is I wanted to know who are the best investment advisors, not with words, with numbers. They are finance professional portraying themselves as money managers, and institutional money managers have statistics, but retail advisors like wirehouses, RIAs, there's no statistics where you from an end customer point of view, okay, where do I rank versus my peers? Not in blah, 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 but in hard truth, mathematical, statistical, basic quantitative methods. And I grew very upset with the local market. I'm in Canada, so there are only 6 banks, and 85% of wealth is controlled by a small number of institutions. So after you've knocked at 4 or 5 doors, that's it. Like you are not building. Screw you. And then even don't try to look at this globally. It's just not happening. Oh, that was my failed attempt at trying to make a legacy style fintech business.
And what were some of the particular pain points that you ran into? Obviously, you said the incumbent industry doesn't want to be transparent, and it's sort of hard to become a member of the club. What do you think this is just a product of complacency in the RIA space, particularly? They're able to just put things on cruise control and subsist off fees for a while. You think it's just...
Well, our RIAs, I think, have a good gig because they're registered independent advisor. Okay, and I think that they have potentially more leeway in terms of venturing into really portfolio management, and they don't have like this big wirehouses pre-selecting products. However, the requirements to become an RIA versus the Canadian equivalent is much lower in the US. The point is, perhaps you're a superstar at managing money, perhaps you're not, but there's no way of knowing it. So the roadblocks were that you need to ask permission to have access to the data. And then to empower end customers. So really, I've tried to launch it in Canada, and it is the canonical answer was not a strategic priority. Well, how can knowing if you're doing your job well, the job that people are paying you for, not being a strategic priority? This should be there from the base layer design. And so they're just making money off people's money without any accountability. And they deserve they have way too much trust placed in them for really what it is. And I stumbled onto the complacency also at the regulator, where they says, "Bah, if banks don't have to do it, they won't do it." It's okay. Well, wait a minute. Who's looking at the end customer here? No one. And then there was a technological roadblock. Just within the institutions themselves, sharing information, sharing data is complicated. And then you have all those. It's an IT infrastructure that was built before the internet. It felt not suited for the internet anymore, and it's just like there's a financial institution in Canada here that has 4,500 people working in the IT department, and it's a small institution. 4,500 people working for the IT department, and yet their entire database has been leaked for $500 worth of chicken delivery gift card. It's a big joke. It's a big joke. Like, this represents like 50% of Quebec people's identity have been breached in that single event, and yet they're not able to compute a standard deviation in an investment account. It's ridiculous.
That's insane. And we're actually the pain points of the incumbent financial system built on tech from the 70s and 80s has really come to light now as people are being forced to work from home. And a lot of these trading desks have a lot of manual processes that they have to handle in-house, back office processes that people need to physically be at the office by the infrastructure, the servers to actually settle this stuff at the end of the day. It's not built for a work from home internet age. So I guess how did your experience with attempting to make this fintech product sort of push you to search for alternatives, and that's how you find Bitcoin? Was Bitcoin on your radar before this?
It was at the radar at the same time. I met someone. I volunteered for 3 years at the Technological Innovation Advisory Committee of the local regulator to bring the perspective of non-bank owned fintech, and I met someone there who introduced me to Bitcoin. So I had it got onto my radar 3 years ago, and he essentially showed me how it worked. At the same time, I was trying my last attempt in the legacy system. When I saw Bitcoin, it reminded me of an experience I had in the 1990s. I was part of M-Banks, which was Bank of Montreal's attempt to become the first virtual bank in the world. Like, we're in 1996, 1997. And it was all cool, beautiful website, very avant-garde. And it totally failed. So that's why people never heard about it. It was too ahead of time. And there was a beautiful front end, but no back end. And I remember that. So when I saw Bitcoin, I did not understand it at all at first. Like, he did a transaction, he showed me, and I said, I don't understand it all. I don't see a glossy website, but I see a tech that's working. And if there's only 10% of what you're telling me that's true, this is huge. And then I started just peeling and digging and understanding the various aspects, and I'm profoundly grateful for Bitcoin. I'm profoundly grateful. I'm grateful that it exists, and I saw Earth connected, like people on Earth connected through this censorship-resistant, borderless technology that cannot be stopped. And I was enlightened and hopeful because of it. Because I clearly see that the previous system doesn't provide as rich as end of its useful life in a sense. But that was before I understood money. And that was before I understood money. That's just the technological infrastructure. And then as a finance, a highly trained finance professional, I'd say a parrot in the end, right? We all really well versed into repeating what I was supposed to repeat and spitting out formulas on piece of paper. I started studying other perspective, and that other perspective, I wondered why this was not available in my school cursus. And it made much more sense to me. But I had to de-learn and relearn stuff. So that's why I think finance professionals in general are at a disadvantage when it comes to learning Bitcoin.
Yeah, no, as somebody who was in finance as well, there was definitely a lot of deprogramming. Somebody who studied economics in college and was force-fed the neoliberal Keynesian view of the world. There was definitely some deprogramming that was necessary. And so what were the steps that you took to understand money? Like how did this understanding happen for you?
Reading Nick Szabo's Shelling Out, The Origin was one of them. I really enjoyed also the primer on Austrian economics. I read the Bitcoin Standard by Saif Dynamos. And I just started to reflect. And when you think that a sip of scotch can be money into the right circumstance, then you have a different forgot the barterability, and then just re-looking at things differently, and the debasement, the monetary policy, the central banks, and so on and so forth.
No, it's crazy that we're born into this world. We're taught that it runs a certain way, and then the most important tool, I would argue, money, a monetary good is a tool at the end of the day. Nobody really understands. And that's what was one of the most enlightening things for me about learning about Bitcoin was, oh my gosh, people don't even understand money. And that's all they care about.
There was a PhD economist and teacher, okay, locally, who wrote an opinion piece in the paper 2 years ago, and he said, he's a PhD economist and he teaches to people. He said $20 will always be $20. Should it be in 1, 3, 5, 10 years because it's backed by the Bank of Canada? I was like, what are you saying? Like, it's just absurdity.
And the Bank of Canada sold all of its gold reserves slowly over time too, correct?
Oh, but just the printing, and just look at how much food you were able to buy in the 70s with $20, and what $20 buys today. Just that you see that it's the nominal versus real. And so I was just shocked that an economist with the well-paid, state-funded pension fund would be allowed to say such an opinion. That's absolutely false.
Yeah, it's not even an opinion; it's just a falsehood.
It's just a falsehood. Yeah.
A
credible mainstream media opinion falsehood. Yeah.
Well, that's the other beauty of Bitcoin. It's helping us realize that there are a bunch of intellectual yet idiots out there that really don't understand what they're talking about, and that is, I think, what you're getting to in the beginning of this episode when you're describing your experience trying to start a startup within this system. Is that people really don't care, and they're sort of a strong incentive for cognitive dissonance. That just, hey, this is working for me up to this point. It's working well. Don't ruin it for me. I don't care. I don't care about the actual integrity of the system.
But let me be good and signal virtue by saying that I'm inclusive of diversity. We've got the women on board. We look like the YMCA. We are good people. But no, don't don't stick out. Don't be different. Don't try stuff. It's permissioned innovation. Let's just be contained. Ask permission, and then we'll grant you if you wanted to do it. Like play with us, and that's just not how innovation can occur. And Bitcoin is permissionless innovation. You didn't ask. Obviously, when you look, I think when you look back at what happened, need to be grateful of all those years of research and development that led to that. There are, like, when you read stuff like a crypto manifesto, and the very forward-thinking people of 10, 20, 30 years ago. So we're very grateful for all the R&D and the thought process they went through. And I think that everybody that ends up in Bitcoin has his own little story, own little angle, but the important thing is that it exists, that it exists, and it allows us to be connected with that.
Bitcoin is, and that is enough.
Bitcoin, that is enough.
And like I was saying earlier, you've just hopped on my radar more recently because of the content you've been putting out, which has been incredible. Thank you for producing it. And one of the best pieces you've put out, which I think we should dive into, is why Bitcoin is not a security. And it's basically just a good article to send individuals who think it may be a security, and describing why Bitcoin is special. You don't really come out and say it outright, I don't believe, in the article, but you describe Bitcoin's immaculate inception and how it's probably impossible to replicate via Bitcoin 2.0, 3.0 at this point, because any further iteration is going to be centralized.
Well, the objective, it was, to put some context, last year, the Canadian securities regulator Canadian securities regulator and IROC, which is a self-regulated organization, well, essentially the bank regulator, securities regulator, a proposal where they wanted to regulate a crypto asset platform. But they are not it looked like a regulatory capture. That's really what it looked like. And they were purposely bundling everything together. And they were putting Bitcoin with all the cryptocurrencies, crypto asset, crypto kitty, with all the shitcoinery. They were putting all that together. And the other cryptocurrencies that are indeed securities I'll carve out a little something for them, in the sense that I don't see value in that, but that's people who want to remove all the scammers and stuff. I think the only positive message I was sent there is, hey, we're trying to get organized globally to raise global crowdfunding. I think that's what the message was, but there was completely missing what the technology is, and I don't see value in it. But regulators and the bankers and the blockchainers wanted it to be a thing, and I saw that Canadian. I knew that what the regulators wanted to do would change nothing to Bitcoin. It would do nothing to Bitcoin. The only people who would be armed are the Canadian people, who would have lower services, lower development. That's the only thing they would achieve. So that's why I took personal time to write a long piece, of which the article is an extract, to demonstrate that Bitcoin is just not under their turf. Like, it's just not in their regime. They have no business in doing that. And the more you dig into Bitcoin, and my article was not trying to define what Bitcoin is. I'm just way too humble, and I would not attempt to define it, but rather to explain why it is not a security, and therefore not under securities regulator. And I think even if they were to put it as a security, which it's demonstrated, and even the Securities Exchange Commission said it's not, the only thing they would achieve is to stall local development and stall people, and just further make other jurisdiction benefit from that development. It would, we as Canadian would be the net losers of that.
Yeah, you'd be on the wrong side of the jurisdictional arbitrage that's playing out.
Yeah, and it's a pure emotional reaction that they're doing. it's a pure, because there was a Quadriga CX, like an exchange. A guy went to die on air quote in India. Whatever the story was, like 250 million vanished, right? And so regulators, we need to do something about this. Well, that's an emotional reaction, because if you don't understand the technology you're dealing with, you don't understand the differences, and you think that fraud, or if regulators think that fraud or incompetence can be regulated away, they're stupid, right? Both fraud is fraud by definition. It's already illegal by a code of law, right? And incompetence cannot be regulated against, because that would mean like cannibalizing themselves.
Right. And instances like this really highlight the need for the need for education. Bitcoin is basically an alien technology, and people are so used to the incumbent system where, again, there's centralized control, and there's ways to get your money back if fraud does happen. But the nature of Bitcoin being a digital bearer asset really should force people to rethink how they interact with this system particularly, but they just assume that it acts like the traditional system. And so there's a level of education needed to get people to a certain point to have an aha moment and understand this.
Well, I think also that if we go back at one of the key characteristics of Bitcoin is that it's one way, it's forward. There's no charge back, right? You cannot reverse a transaction, and you are able to do that digitally without an independent third party, and that's not sufficiently appreciated because I will comment for Canadian credit cards, but here, if there's a fraud on your credit card, you get reimbursed, right? Yeah, so good job to make people more responsible. Oh no, it's okay if say I'll be reimbursed. Well, everybody pays those frauds, right? It's passed by the banks and the merchant and the fees, and we all everybody pays. Everybody that uses a credit card pays for that, because it's put in the merchant price. The merchant price increases the goods or services it sells, and so on and so forth. So when you think that all those identity breach that have been name it, there's been so much identity breach, our credit card model is still holding up. So back, what does Bitcoin do? Like, it's uncensorable, one way, no chargeback payment. And just for that component, I think is a prouesse. Like, it's a very important characteristic, and people focus on the price swing. Price is not completely irrelevant, because it's part of the financial incentivization. We all like to know that there's sufficient hashing power backing the security and so on and so forth. But I think there's been a misplaced attention on the price and not enough on what it does.
No, and it's hard. We're humans, right? We're addicted to short term, especially in today's day and age where we live on consumerism and short-term thinking, and we're in a high-velocity trash economy. The price swings are really grab people's attention. But like you were mentioning, the innovation of Bitcoin being a push system and not a pull system is massive. And as somebody who's been in the financial sector for almost 30 years now, how does this change people's interactions with merchants, with potential banks in the future? How does this empower or disadvantage people potentially in this new system?
Well, I think that right now the legacy system still functions, right? It still operates decently well, and there's the understanding of the value of money and the printing. So we'll leave that aside. But so far, people are able to wire by email. They're able to use their credit card. They're able to use ATM. But it's the what if? What if I don't have access to that? And what we've seen recently, if I look at the financial market, You've and I compare with Bitcoin, no central bank intervention. They didn't. The Bitcoin during all that turmoil, no central bank intervention, no short circuit, no stock market closure. Operated the 24/7, 365, does exactly what it's supposed to do, without repo, without etc. So I think it's severely underappreciated how much the legacy system needs plumbing, fixing, and interventions. That started way before Corona. Like the repo market, was hiccuping since last fall. Right, so these were and the curve inversed like I think 12 months ago. So these were all signals ahead of time. So more intervention. Bitcoin, beautiful, does what it's supposed to do. Yes, other than the price, nothing has changed. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. So what it changes for consumer merchant adoption, I think that there's an education curve for individual people to understand how it works, and I try to do that as much as possible. Locally they know people know that I support and accept Bitcoin. I help with showing transaction, where to buy, and to onboard people, but it's still seen as great. It's still seen as crazy. It is still seen as crazy.
It is still very early, but I think it is important to circle back on the fact that interventions have been happening pretty aggressively since last fall with the repo markets, particularly. A lot of people are going to blame coronavirus on this big slowdown and the market failure, where it really is just a spark that lit a bunch of fuel that's been building up for quite some time.
Convenient culprit.
Excuse me?
Convenient culprit?
Yes, exactly. And that's one thing it's on my mind right now is how do we, like, a lot of people are going to blame Corona. How do we get through to people that this Corona was only the impetus for laying bare the problems that have been systemic throughout the system?
I think that I wouldn't tackle it this way. Corona is an emotional reaction, like to population. Like right now, people are not. I think that there's a high level of general anxiety.
Yes.
Lots of unknown. Let's say that it requires empathy, a lot of empathy, and because it's emotional. People are scared. We are completely in uncharted territory. We've both from a pandemic stand economic. Very aggressively doing interventions. This doesn't change the cantillon effect. Which means that people that are closest to the money printing will benefit first. So what happens down the road? If everybody's, you may throw helicopter money at people, they will feel good momentarily, but they will not go back to restaurants and spend they may hoard it, or they may realize that the price of goods has significantly increased. Like that's why I say, wow, why is my money buying so few goods, so few of what I need? And then people get to understand the notion of inflation and currency dilution, and for example, my local currency, Canadian dollar, has been trashed. Like we've lost so much. So imagine what we need to import. Like people will feel the price, and I think that there will be the best moment, to explain how you can store in something in an alternative, right?
Yeah, and it is heavy. Like how bad do you think things get this time around? Do you think here? I mean, I am very American centric just because of the fact I live in the U.S. and so that's who's always on my mind, the Fed's reaction and then our federal government's reaction. Do you think the U.S. Federal Reserve this time around can really keep the system persisting in stasis as they did after the 2008 crisis, or have things gotten too out of hand at this point?
I don't know. But I don't want to think of a really catastrophic scenario, because I want people to have the time to have an alternative. I think there's an intermediary step where the Fed will try everything they can in their model without going to negative interest rates, that I don't think the US will do. But I think it'll be a concerted effort both on tax breaks, helicopter money. They have already taken the rates to zero, the printing, the playing with the reserve rates, and so on and so forth. They will play with all the levers. But Jerome Powell had already hinted a few months ago that they were running out of ammunitions. So if they're running out of ammunitions, that means that they've got to the end. They've got to the end of what they were, of what the model is. When you take rates to zero, and if you look at the history of previous crises, I'll just go through the history of while I was working. I went through long-term capital management, the tech bubble, the real estate mortgage, the squeeze in '08, and this one. And it felt like a long-term capital management was the hedge fund, the over-leveraged / fraud, the over-levered, and then the techno bubble, and it was sectorial. Right? It was not a widespread in the economy. And that's what's so worrying right now, is that now the Main Street will feel it. Right? Previously, it was the Wall Street that felt it. Now Main Street is feeling it, and it's feeling it in all sectors. Yeah. And people are in debt. And that's what worries me the most, because how do we reconstruct and rebuild? And people, bored people with not enough money, not lots of money ahead, scared, anxiety, with times stuck at home. Like I'm afraid that people may develop bad habits. Right? We need to stay in good shape and healthy. So the prediction is we'll come out of that. But it's going to take long, and how, that I don't know.
Yeah. No, we are in uncharted territories, and that's really the most saddening thing about the situation, with the coronavirus shutting everything down and people being asked to stay home for 2 weeks at least, potentially more, potentially a couple months. It's really highlighting the fact that people don't have savings. Most people, your average Joe, does not have a savings account, a rainy day fund to weather this storm, and that's even being percolated up the ladder to small businesses and even larger businesses like Boeing. The incentivization of our system has made it so people don't have savings, and this is, I mean,
the bailouts, like how the population will react to bailouts. Like I don't think I don't think most people, or many, have connected that. Yeah, you're saving those big corporations with your own money, right? It's you socialize, you democratize, you the gain just a few, and then you socialize the loss, but they don't feel it, because we have economists saying that $20 is $20, so they don't see the digits change in their bank account. If anything, they're going to get helicopter money, which increases the number of digits in their bank account. But they don't. So it's a manipulative scheme where they enrich again the riches and the cronies. Just let those businesses go down, and then someone else will pick it up with capital, and they'll do a new model. But that's hard, and that's when people are emotional, you cannot tell them, it's going to be a cold shower, and then we rebuild.
Yeah, no, it's disgusting seeing Trump talk about bailing out the cruise line industry right now. Like something that's completely unnecessary.
I don't think it's Trump specific. I think it's any politicians right now. I don't think there's. I absolutely don't think it's Trump specific, and it is the normal move in the system it operates in. Like that. That's how things work. I'm not saying that this, but they will all do that because that's what they do. They want voters to sustain that societal organization.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. It highlights the different incentive structures that exist between the incumbent system and now Bitcoin, where Bitcoin, I think it's the most beautiful incentive system ever created. It exists and creates this beautiful feedback loop where everybody's somewhat forced to cooperate for the better good of the system, and at the end of the day, the better good of each individual within the system. And yeah, so do you think Bitcoin's ready? If we had to transition to Bitcoin right now, do you think the network and the stacks above it are ready? I mean, I personally think we need a little bit more time, but are you happy with where Bitcoin is at this given point in time, being 11 years old, the technology at the protocol level and the things being built on top of it?
Well, I'm super proud of what it has achieved. I'm very proud of what it has achieved. I'm grateful it exists. More time will always be needed, but but during this crisis, if Bitcoin weathers that, can you imagine after we'll say, yeah, it weathered Corona, no closure, 24/7, etc. Now, is it ready for a massive onboarding? I would like to see the hash rate, which is already high, but much higher, much higher. Like, and that will build through time with the economic equilibrium built into it. But I would like to see it consuming more energy.
You're going to boil the oceans, though.
Oh, yes, we're going to boil the oceans, of course.
So this is a good transition into something in Quebec, Hydro-Quebec particularly. They seem to misunderstand the incentives of Bitcoin. And so what was the situation there? They miners were allowed to use the excess energy from Hydro-Quebec to mine at very low prices, but then once it hit a certain scale, the government sort of enacted taxes that made it unprofitable and pushed miners away.
Yeah, I'll tell you the story because I was pretty close to that. But before, just on the boil the ocean, when you understand Bitcoin is the cleanest technology, and when it's understood that you don't spend Bitcoin on trash, on disposable stuff, and that you are much more deliberate into what you're buying, and you're going for the higher quality, longer lasting, you're much more prudent with your expenditure, then we may solve a lot of the environmental concern of consumption society. I think Bitcoin is super green. I just think it's just not understood.
Yes. Now, I like to say Bitcoin is the real Green New Deal.
I do think so. Yes. But anyway, let's go back to the mining in Quebec. The story goes like that. Here in Quebec, we have hydroelectricity, so renewable power, and we have yearly surpluses. Hydro-Quebec, the state-owned energy provider, was actively trying to do business development with both data center and miners. They were so successful in their endeavors that too many demand came all at once, and they didn't know what to do. Their claims is that they received for 18,000 megawatts of demand, where Quebec's capacity at peak is 40,000 megawatts. So they were claiming that miners wanted to have half of our power, and so they went to the government. Government did not understand cryptocurrency, and with one decision says, no, we're going to do a moratorium decree and crank price by 3 times and put all this bureaucratic, administrative, whatever. So there was a public audience in front of Quebec Energy Board, and you should have seen the people that showed up. Like, it was packed. It was all the entrepreneurs of small, medium, larger size that they say, hey, you have extra power. We want to buy the power. We're not asking for any government subsidy. We're not asking to pay cheaper than other clients. You are actively soliciting us. We want to operate in Quebec. And then because of that one, Mr. Moreau, that Minister Moreau, who really did not want to understand what the energy, what it was about, which he doesn't need to understand. There's no electricity police anyway. So there was lots of people that showed up in that public audience, and everybody was super upset. There were so many people, they had to put another room, and then 18 months of bureaucratic, administrative, governmental BS. Mining went elsewhere. And so what is a shame is Quebec still has energetic surpluses that are going to waste. We're trying to catch deals with our neighbors to sell that extra electricity. And then this Hydro-Quebec was claiming that they received 18,000 megawatt of demand, and now they're barely able to fill 300. Please explain what happened between 18,000 and 300. And it's, the demand has been smaller than expected. Inaccurate, false, bullshit. The hashing power has been deployed elsewhere. Over that same period, it more than, I think it's 12 to 14x the hashing power on the Bitcoin network. So it's not true that demand was lower. The business went elsewhere, along with the revenues, the tax, the jobs, being able to develop locally. So.
Yeah, no, they got priced out. And then, so there was a thread that I was a part of, and it was a bunch of, yourself included, Montreal citizens debating in French. And from what I could glean, at one point, somebody from Hydro-Quebec said there wasn't enough miners. Like, even if you wanted to consume that energy, people want to have enough miners to bring it, which seemed like a straw man as well.
Oh no, I don't think their objective was to understand. Like, they wanted all cryptocurrency to be consuming of energy. Sometimes when I look back, I really wonder, were they well informed? Who was informing them? Could there be someone that told them, no, don't worry, Bitcoin is boiling the ocean. We have something better that doesn't consume energy, that Bitcoin is just a fad? Well, whatever it is, how can they be in a position to decide which business have access to electricity or not, right? I think it's a dangerous rope, and in the end, they've put the conditions so miners can come here, but it took so long. Like, you snooze, you lose. You snooze, you lose. Business went elsewhere, and now that's it. So.
Yeah, and how could miners ever trust them not to do what they did the first time around, right? Like, why would you invest that much capital into an operation with the unknown of the Canadian government coming in and just stopping it at any given point in time?
With one comment from one minister, he was able to triple the rate and drag them into this long process. I've seen cool projects here. Like, I've seen cool prototypes. People wanted to try stuff with the heat, with the energy consumption, with all sorts of stuff. That's all gone. All that innovation is just not happening here. But let's be all happy. We have a minister of innovation. I feel so much better. We have, at the government level, a minister of innovation. That should save us all.
Well, it really highlights the conflict of top down versus bottom up. Bitcoin's very bottom up, emergent, and these centralized governments and systems are very top down. And I think people are beginning to wake up that this is not a way to run stuff. Micromanaging whole economies from the top down just doesn't work. It creates roadblocks and really stifles innovation, like you just described. So do you have any hope for Canada sort of moving away from the policies that have been the norm for the last decade?
No.
No.
No. I really don't. I don't see things changing here. And I think that in the 10, 15, 20 years from now, just like imagine if we go back in 1994, okay, and imagine like Google and those internet companies wanted to build a data center in middle, like in prime land downtown data center, they would have said no. Now 25 years later, they are providing tax break, red carpet, subsidies. They all want those businesses. That's exactly what will happen. And in 10, 15 years, the businesses, the Bitcoin business will have developed elsewhere. And there won't be service locally, or will be serviced by the tax revenues will be elsewhere, and they'll be upset, just like the media. Right, the media are struggling. I think the same thing to financial is happening than in the media. And I hope that there's more ways to create, and I think it will always be ways to create. But I think that's why it's important to, when there's a possibility, to push back. Like when I wrote why Bitcoin is not a security, it's important to stand out and push back. Like this is not for them to regulate. It will just harm us more.
Yeah, it's no, thank you for pushing back. And it's actually sort of ironic because some of the most creative Bitcoiners are in Canada. You have Rodolfo Novak with Cold Card. You have Francis Poulet with Bull Bitcoin. Yourself with all the work that you've been doing, the content you've been putting out. Some of
all the others you don't see, and all the others that are invisible. Right?
Yeah, and no, I feel for my Canadian friends up north, and I mean, we don't have, or I don't think our problems are as bad as yours may be here in America, but I do hope that we are able to avoid sort of reactionary policies in our government. And luckily we've had a few representatives stand up on Capitol Hill and defend Bitcoin, but
it's more than defend Bitcoin, is to defend your constitution.
Right.
Is to defend fundamental rights, right? And as there's a new as there's a new onboarding, this needs to be defended. This cannot be taken for granted. Like, you weren't born with these. These were fought for, and I think that's what's at stake. And I think that in situations like we are right now in Corona, people are emotional, and that's dangerous for increased control and reduced liberties.
No, I agree, and I think that's why it's important, and I really appreciate your pretension to define Bitcoin, because that's a problem we have here in the States across regulatory agencies. It's defined differently. It's either a commodity, a currency, but really it should be speech at the end of the day, right?
So this is software. It's all software. Software or speech. That's it.
Yeah.
It's a database.
This is something Beauty On really pushes on, and I sort of kick myself when I call it money, even though it can be used as money and leveraged as money. At the end of the day, it is simply a messaging protocol with scarce information space.
Yeah, and I think Beauty On's work has been instrumental to my understanding, and I go back and reading what he wrote, like stuff he wrote before I was even aware that Bitcoin existed, and then I think his perspective is extremely valuable. Yes, he's harsh, and he should be. Like, he should be. Okay, totally calls us out. Like, not that I must admit it, we don't like. Nobody likes to be beaten up, but when deserved, I'm grateful that he does that.
No, I am too, and I think coronavirus is finally going to force me to interview him remotely. I've had many conversations with Beauty On in the past, and I always thought we were going to meet up for beers in Brooklyn and talk in person, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. So I'm going to have to reach out to him again and get him on here to get his view, because again, he is very harsh. He is very hard on people, but the stakes are so high that I don't blame him for being harsh.
He's harsh, but he's right.
Right?
He may be a pain, but he's right. And that's the best compliment you can get. You're a pain, but you're right. That's it. It's
yeah, no, and it's No, we're lucky to have him. But yeah, and that's the other weird thing about today. Like you're talking about virtue signaling. A lot of people don't like to hear the hard truths that the beauty-ons of the world put out there. It hurts their feelings, which is something we need to get away from as well.
Well, that's something they will need to deal with individually. So if you cannot take criticism and you cannot self-reflect, then that's your individual problem. Work on it.
Yeah. No.
I wish I had nailed everything and knew everything and wouldn't commit a mistake. Of course not. I will do mistakes. I just want to do no harm, and I hope to minimize the amount of mistakes and minimize the amount of magnitude. But I think it's important to just continue reading, studying, enriching ourselves, and someone calling you out is actually a compliment because the person cares.
Yeah. And
view it as a compliment.
Yeah. And to use a cheesy analogy, you're only as strong as your weakest link in this blockchain world. So being harsh and critical on each other is important to make us as strong as possible at the end of the day.
But it doesn't fit well with people with the corporate culture of we need to be nice and all in agreement and have this cohesive view of this beautiful world. Like it's when I worked on the trading desk back in the early 2000s, swap desk, bond desk is no country club, right? It's harsh. It's what have you done for me lately? Cut the crap. It's cutthroat. It's really cutthroat. And then finance has become this beautiful, more common pool. Everybody's nice. We need to have those common values. I don't know what happened, but if you suck, you go down and you fold. You're not being picked up in this common pool, like you fold. That's it. Tough luck.
Woke capital's made it to the investment banking world. Goldman Sachs is not going to IPO companies that don't have a diverse enough boardroom.
What a bullshit thing that was. Okay. And I covered that in my newsletter, and someone wrote to me and he said, well, what about a gay white man who doesn't want to make a coming out? Are you going to force me to make a coming out so I can IPO because you need that virtue signaling? And I once said this is so wrong. It's like saying we look like the YMCA, so we are diverse and we are worthy of doing that. Well, I don't think is. I'm very happy not to be in the corporate world anymore. I just couldn't stand it. I would be. They would inject me so fast. Like I just couldn't stand it. I'm sorry.
I'm unemployable at this point too. It's an attack on meritocracy at the end of the day and ideas.
Totally. I spoke with a financial executive recently. Doesn't matter where, but he said, "Oh yeah, no, right now it's more a bonus pool. It's more." Hold on, sorry. My mother texting me. I thought of it. He said that it's now a part of a pool, okay? And people who don't portray the desired behaviors will be negatively impacted. Okay, so who is hungry? If you're not hungry, how will you nail it? How will you progress? How will you be super, super good? How will you go out and hunt? When you have this regime of behavioral, how you're seen, and then that's why you see the LinkedIn walls with all. I support women. I support transgender. I support whatever. Can you just support talent and shut up and move on? Like it's just. I find that absurd.
Yeah, I had to delete my LinkedIn. I couldn't take it anymore.
Oh,
And again, I'm unemployable, so it was worthless to me at this point.
I am amazed at the amount of unemployable, talented people that end up in Bitcoin. I'm amazed at that, and that makes me hopeful. Like,
no, it really does, and that's another thing that makes me hopeful and long-term bullish is the intellectual capital that is working on this in all realms, from the protocol level to people writing the code and the cryptography that make it work, people building on second layers, whether it be Lightning Network, Liquid, whatever that may be, and then individual content creators like yourself who are helping to educate people who are looking into this Bitcoin world, like what the hell's going on in there. It seems like, and that's the beauty of the system too, it's completely decentralized in all facets. Nobody hired you to write this stuff. You said, hey, if not me, then who? Somebody needs to articulate
it's voluntary.
This. Yeah. And it's beautiful. And I think we can wrap this up with maybe your thoughts on what you're looking forward to within the Bitcoin world in the next 6 months to a year. Is there anything you're excited for, anything you're working on particularly that you're excited about?
Well, anything that can help with Bitcoin in the hand of people, like the onboarding, helping people, making the everything easier to use, making the nodes easier, making the automatic contribution easier, making privacy easier, like all the development, and also that's happening with the halving. We'll see with the halving how it unfolds. But it's amazing that it's happening at the same time that we're dealing with a global pandemic and reaching the end of the central banking ammunition at the same time that Bitcoin is going into his third the halving period. I find it pretty amazing. So be empathetic, but and open to people who want to learn, because never forget that not everybody is supercomputer savvy, and Bitcoin can be intimidating because it feels technical. Like imagine that you always send stamps on a letter, and now you're supposed to use this electronic mail. Well, it can be as intimidating. So I think taking the time to share the passion and to do hand holding at the different level will be beneficial to most. But again, that's a voluntary initiative.
Yes. And thank you for taking the initiative onto yourself and volunteering to help bring Bitcoin to the masses. Elisabeth, has been a massive pleasure. I really appreciate you taking some time to sit down. Where can we find out more about you, your writings, and just anything you may be working on?
Octonomics.com. So that's OCTONOMICS.com. I have a weekly newsletter where I curate content. I do little rants and just have a habit of producing content on Saturday morning or Sunday morning. That's the best way to follow my work.
Awesome. And then what your Twitter handle is?
ePréfontaine.
ePréfontaine. Okay, I will share that.
Yeah.
I will share that in the show notes. Elisabeth, again, thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks for what you're doing. I think the freaks are going to love this episode. Peace and love.